Well, hello there. I am Kimberly HayDay Muga.
And I'm Amanda Day.
And you're listening to Fundraising HayDay,
where we cover the how-tos of grants and fundraising.
And how we can all do a better job of changing the world through philanthropy.
Special thanks to our Patreon subscribers who make this podcast possible. To join this amazing community where we make monthly playlists, have a book club, wide open mistakes were made, and Kimberly's monthly musings, please visit patreon.com/fundraising HayDay.
And if I'm not mistaken, Amanda, there are places where people can hear samples of these things on our Patreon.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's
that you can
free
try,
versions of everything.
Try before you buy.
There you go. So now, if you are looking to up your grant game this year, but you're not sure that you have time for extended conferences or even 2 full days of training, because hello, we're all juggling a lot right now. Well, we have the answer for you. Look no further than HayDay Services on-demand courses. We have a 12-module grant writing audio course, as well as a 12-module grant management course.
And what our goal, and what I know we did, is we brought you quality content that you can look at, or in this case, listen to on your own schedule, yes. Right? When you're ready, when you're doing laundry, when you're eating lunch, or when you just need some professional development time because it's part of your job and you have a lovely employer that allows you that time, well, then it's there for you. It's there for you. You can get one module and you can go to our website and check it out and see which topics work for you. But prices start as low as $19.99 for like one single 30-minute nuggets of wisdom kind of thing, or you can get an entire course in either grant writing or grant management for $197. So you go to HayDay Services, that's HayDay services.com/shop to find the module or the series that best fits your needs.
And remember, if you're a member of the Grant Professionals Association, you get 25% off that. You just go to your member benefits space on the GPA website and you can get that. And if you have trouble finding it, holler at us. We'll help you figure it out.
We will make it happen.
Yes, we will. Now, today for the podcast, we are thrilled to have a guest who brings a rare combination of data chops and real-world nonprofit experience to the table. He is the author of Robots Make Bad Fundraisers, How Nonprofits Can Maintain the Heart in the Digital Age. He's a frequent webinar presenter and conference speaker with nearly 2 decades of experience advising nonprofits on donor communications, data management, and digital content. He currently serves as the Director of Engagement and Technology at Capital Campaign Pro, which empowers nonprofit leaders through expert guidance, peer support, and the tools for successful campaign. We're going to welcome to this show Stephen Shattuck right after a quick word from our sponsor. Y'all, we are so very excited to introduce our listeners to the first Season 9 sponsor of the Fundraising HayDay podcast. Grant Guru is the world's largest aggregator of grants and funding, and this incredible prospect research tool has made its way all the way from Australia to the United States. It's a searchable database that is updated daily, and it is so user-friendly. We're joined today by Adrian Spencer, co-founder and director of Grant Guru, to learn more about this incredible product with a mini-series during the first 12 episodes of this season.
So, Adrian, in our last episode of Fundraising HayDay, we talked about the reporting feature. Amanda and I just got really excited about that. But there's more. I would love for you to talk to us more today about the email alerts that Grant Guru does. How does that work, and how does that benefit the user?
Yeah, hi, Kimberly. No one wants to spend hours in a database each week to see what's new. But the churn is really high. So we would estimate there's, on average, 100 grants opening every week and 100 closing every week. So once you've gone in and done your initial deep dive, you can then set email alerts to provide you with tailored notifications according to what you specifically wanted to be alerted to. what type of grants, what sector, what activity, in which states. We've got a whole lot of criteria. You can set them and you can change them at any time. So then whenever a new program opens or reopens, you can simply get an email saying, here's something that might be of interest. You can also decide how often you get those alerts. And if you're getting too little or too much, you can adjust that as well. I do it daily. It only takes me a few minutes to scan the list and to see what's new. But as all grant writers know, you want to find out as early as possible about funding, and definitely not 24 hours before it closes, or the day after. We've all been there. Our job is to keep you up to date, and we do that with email alerts.
Nice. Thanks. Find out more about this fantastic new resource for grant seekers. Visit grantguru.com/US. You get access to a user-friendly search engine, email alerts, grants calendar, customizable grant reports, and so much more.
And as an added bonus, Grant Guru is providing our listeners with 20% off their subscription. So when you go to make your purchase, use the discount code HayDay963. That's HayDay 963.
Well, Stephen, we are so glad you're here. Today, we are diving into the wonderful world of capital campaigns and some other cool stuff. A topic that can be kind of exciting and also terrifying for a lot of people, myself included, when I first became aware that part of other duties as assigned was to help figure this out at different agencies where I've worked. And what I'm so excited about is not only to see you and talk to you again, but also that you've got some cool new data. And as a nerd of all nerds, I am excited by good data. So I'm real excited to get into that. But before we do, everyone that comes on, we ask the same kind of question. Because most of us did not have, you may be different, you may break the mold today, but I don't know. Most folks don't have, as children, they're not like, I want to be an astronaut or a development director or a grant writer. I really, major gifts is where it's at, and a ballerina. So we'd love to hear your origin story about how you got into the world of fundraising that you've inhabited so amazingly for many years now.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I love your show, and when it comes to grants, you guys are my go-to. So it's awesome to be here. And
Thanks.
it's funny, Kimberly, you asked that because that is my wife. She actually did always aspire to work in nonprofits and be a fundraiser. But I did not.
Okay.
And so when I tell the story that I'm about to tell you guys, she gets mad because she's like, "You never even meant to be doing this," and I always did. And it's like maybe it's my villain origin story. I don't know, but I went to film school and I dropped out. And I transferred to another school and was an English major. I was a creative writing major, and I thought maybe I'll go after my MFA and write memoirs and poetry. But I ended up, after graduating, going to work for a marketing agency, which actually is where I encountered a lot of other sort of wayward English majors. That's actually, I discovered it was kind of a common career path. But the agency that I worked for just so happened to serve nonprofits almost exclusively. And so I sort of cut my teeth in fundraising on making gala videos. So I was part of a crew that if you needed like a 3-minute long tearjerker video about your nonprofit to play right before a table ask at a gala, that's what we specialized in, which is a thing. And actually, I had a lot of fun doing it. So we would get to go to the galas and have a nice dinner, and wish we could bid on the items because we were just out of college. But that's kind of where I learned, case for support and storytelling, and in the context of fundraising. And it was really fun. And I sort of moved around to a couple different agencies, and I found myself at another marketing agency that Jay Love, who was the founder of eTapestry and later Bloomerang, was a CEO of. And I was just like a 20-year-old kind of know nothing, but he and I kind of bonded over the fact that we were both sort of from the nonprofit sector. And when he went to start Bloomerang, he kind of stole me away and said, "Hey, I'm going to start this company. Do you want to come run marketing?" And that was in 2011, and I was there for over 10 years, and really got to know fundraising from kind of the database side, which was really fun. And now I've moved to Capital Campaign Pro, and I'm kind of learning that discipline of fundraising, which, like you said, Kimberly, is very daunting, but also a lot of fun in kind of an exhilarating way. So that's, fell completely backwards into it, but have stayed. And it does sometimes annoy my wife, who is, a career fundraiser and has always aspired to be, but it's okay. We get to talk shop. So
I think we may need to add that in the future, either your origin story or your villain origin story, because, I like that.
Yep.
I like that.
You might have them.
That's hysterical. Well, so with your new work now with Capital Board Pro, you all released the Capital Campaign Benchmark Study, and we give us a thumbnail version of how the study was set up, and a finding or two that surprised you about it.
Well, when I got there, capital campaigns were new to me, and one of the things I asked for is like, okay, who puts out the benchmark study? Like, I want to read it and really get to know. And Amy and Andrea, the co-founders, are like, actually, there isn't one. And I was kind of surprised because it's such a big discipline of fundraising. And so I floated the idea, well, why don't we make one, right? I mean, we have the ability to send out a survey and get probably enough responses for it to be a viable study. And they said, great, let's do it. So we put together 3 surveys. We mailed it out to our whole list and said, if you're thinking about a campaign, if you're in a campaign, or if you recently finished a campaign, whichever cohort you self-select into, answer these questions, because we just kind of want to know, like, how do people, deal with their campaigns, and why do they do them, and how much money they raise, and how successful are they, and does doing a feasibility study matter, and all these great things. Because, the sector, we have like case studies and anecdotes, but we were kind of missing that third piece of just kind of some hard concrete data. So we did it, and we got a great response in the first year. I think we had maybe 300 or 400 unique campaigns analyzed in the first year, and now we're in our third year, and we're up close to 700. And it's been a blast, and it's fun to be able to kind of just say, here's the data. There's no opinion. There's no sort of, it's not just like all of our clients, and it's just kind of a backdoor way of just kind of talking about how we do things. It's really the whole sector, which is valuable. And there's a ton of great, interesting things. There were some things that surprised us. There were some things that just sort of validated what we and most capital campaign consultants would say and have been saying. One thing, since you asked, Amanda, when I'm sort of talking to people who are thinking about a campaign, one of the most common questions they're sort of concerned about is, well, what's going to happen to the annual fund? Like, is doing a campaign going to cannibalize the annual fund? Like, does it even matter if we're just sort of pulling from that bucket for a new bucket? And historically, I think most campaign consultants would say, we don't really see that. It can happen. And our research does verify that it can and does happen, but it doesn't happen very often. Between 10 and 20% of the time do they see a decrease in the annual fund. But most people, it at least holds steady, and for a good chunk of people, it actually grows, which was fun to see, because that's sort of a, I don't know if myth is sort of the too strong of a word, but it's definitely kind of a fear that we can alleviate by saying, here's 700 campaigns analyzed or whatever, and very few of them saw a drop. So that's one that always comes to mind, Amanda, when it comes to like, interesting insights or surprising things in the report. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in the report around hiring and, impact of the campaign on multiple fronts of the organization. So it's a good read, whether or not you're, in or just thinking about a campaign, whether, whatever phase you're in, there's some good stuff in there for you.
Nice.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, I think it's also sort of piggybacking on that. It is a real fear that, if we ask people for money twice, they're going to freak out and they'll hate us.
Right.
But it can also open doors from grant writing perspective, it can open doors to other foundations that normally wouldn't do that, that they would, they're really into capital campaigns and that's what they do, or that maybe your program area wasn't theirs, but capital campaigns, that's where you intersect. So it can be a happy ending for bringing in new foundations as well.
Yeah, it's a great donor acquisition activity, across the board. And we ask people, where did the money come from? In terms of individuals, foundations, public grants, corporate gifts, and foundation grants, just as one, was a huge chunk. I think it was like 91% of the campaigns we analyzed had at least one foundation gift. So the grants play a huge role in capital campaigns, and it doesn't really get talked enough enough about it, I feel like, and hopefully doing this podcast we can start to change that. But I mean, yeah, Kimberly, you're absolutely right. It's a great sort of catalyst for new things, like a capital campaign, and grants is just one of those.
So sort of Bill, go ahead, Amanda. I can see you have a burning question.
Oh, well, I was just two things I was going to say is one, I do love that your study is not just your clients, because that's what mostly what you see when you see capital campaigns.
It's annoying.
Well, I mean, I get that you have access to what you have access to. So it is nice that there is kind of an across the board. And I would say, building on the grant topic, I've only been involved in one capital campaign. My background mostly is in federal and state grants for local governments, which, we don't do capital campaigns. We have other ways to do that. But I worked a couple of years ago, I worked for a consulting firm that mostly did capital campaigns, and they had a grant division. And we got looped into one particular capital campaign. And so that was my first aspect of understanding how grants can play a role in capital campaigns. And what's fascinating to me is that, yes, we did go after some large capital funders on the foundation side, but we also went after a ton of, like, even if it's $10,000, because we're like,
mid,
to add up, right? And so, which I would have thought of that, but the guy I was working with, he's like, I've done this a million times. This is what we're going to do. We're going to tackle, So we were getting requests out the door left and right, even for smaller amounts. And it was amazing to see how much it stacked up and added to impact. So,
and plus beyond the campaign, maybe establishing relationships with those funders, that could become more. And I love that. Definitely tracks with our work too, Amanda, like 5-figure, maybe low 6. It can make a difference when you're talking about, a $5-10 million goal. That's not nothing.
No.
So yeah, I mean, we recommend people, maybe even the feasibility study, including a couple funders like that in that group of 30 or 40, interviewees. So I love it. There's definitely a big place for it.
So I'm excited that we started on a super positive note, because positive, but I'm also curious about most of the organizations that responded then were like, yes, we've had success and this is great. And obviously there were some that didn't. So what does the data and in this benchmark study, ongoing benchmark study, tell us about sort of the biggest difference separating the organizations that hit their goal and not ones that almost made it? I mean, if you're $5,000 or $10,000 short, then whatever, but they significantly fell short of their goal. Are there any characteristics or things that came out of the data that you could talk about?
Yeah, it's interesting because, us as an agency, we always try to identify like specific pit holes to avoid, right?
Yeah.
And we sort of know them anecdotally, but it's always good to have some hard empirical data. Most people were satisfied. That was the question, as it was worded. Were you satisfied with the campaign? Yes or no? Like a 95% clip. Now, a lot of those people, to your point, Kimberly, they didn't hit their goal. I mean, I think it was maybe someone in like the 60 or 70% of goal attainment still said they were happy. So I like to point that out, because it's like, if you raise $8 million instead of 10, like, that's still pretty good, right? I mean, you can do some good stuff with $8 million, and maybe the goal was too high or whatever. In 3 and 4 years of doing this, I still am kind of waiting to hear those true horror stories. I haven't gotten them, but I get the sense that when a campaign fails, it fails very early on, right? Maybe there isn't readiness work done that's appropriate. Maybe they skip a feasibility study and just kind of go full on with the goal kind of pulled out of a hat. But to answer your question, Kimberly, when a more mature campaign goes off the rails, it's usually one of two reasons. One is leadership departure mid-campaign.
Okay, sure.
That's a real killer. And usually that's unexpected, right? And sometimes it's, medical related. It just, the whole organization is sort of, it's upheaval, let alone just the campaign. That is a big one. Another thing is sort of unexpected kind of headwinds in terms of, gosh, the land we wanted to buy, we found an environmental issue, and now we're really far along, and it's going to be hard to change paths. So I would kind of chalk up those two big reasons as like unexpected and not sort of self-enforced errors. But there are some sort of tangible things where maybe people take a bit of a shortcut, right? They don't do a feasibility study. They don't get help, either external or internal. They don't staff up appropriately. I know some of this kind of it might sound self-serving coming from a provider of consulting services, but even staffing is a big one because you can hire a consultant, but if you don't also have the staff and board support, and I kind of chalk that up as kind of volunteering, that's really hard to overcome. Also, the board's got to be involved. They certainly got to have buy-in. And capital campaigns are additive work. And if you don't have people that can either pick up the slack or, do the other things to keep the lights on, that's hard. And that's one area where we see kind of the annual fund cannibalization materialize. So, part of doing a big campaign like this is staffing up appropriately, making sure the board is supportive, and is willing to invest in the staff because they're the ones going to be doing a lot of the work.
Fair enough. I wish that I had a recording of you saying that about 15 years ago. It would have been super helpful.
Right.
There's folks who need it now, I'm sure, too.
Well, when I'm working with clients, it's a little bit different. As a consultant now, I'm able to say, hey, I can do this, but not that. And if you want to do this full-fledged capital campaign, I can assist, but you probably do need to bring in folks who can do the things like the feasibility study and all of that to make sure, because I agree. I think sometimes they're like, we're just going to build a building. Let's have a show.
Go.
Let's get the money. And then it's like, if you are in a smaller city that literally may not have that capacity, or you haven't built those relationships with the movers and shaker donors and the important family foundations, then it will kind of just not take off, I guess.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, and I think it's important where you said, you probably going to need to bring in more help. But I will say I work for a consulting firm that we have a client right now that's thick in a capital campaign, but instead of hiring us to do their capital campaign, they wanted to focus on that. They hired us to handle their regular.
I love that.
Okay.
I was like, hey,
absolutely love that.
That's a good idea.
It's a great client for us because we have all their body. They've already built the relationships. We can see past applications. So it's very easy for us to continue and hold down the fort for them while they work on their capital campaign.
I love that. I think that's the right modality. And it's not because the stuff that you're picking up, Amanda, is like less than, but the work of the capital campaign is so focused on donor relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to outsource that, right? I mean, because achieving the goal is table stakes, but to me, it's like the stuff after the campaign that the relationships are going to benefit. All those long tail benefits really start with the staff and the volunteers and the board, nurturing the relationships themselves. So I love that. I think that's the right way to go, honestly.
Yeah,
I am like I'm over here making notes. That's I love that idea. I love that idea.
I've never heard that before, but I was like, hey, that's a cool way to go about it.
That's good.
Hopefully
I know. Speaking of grant writers, so we've talked about how grants can certainly augment capital campaign work, but I think there are times when nonprofits are like looking at their grant writers going, hey, you're a capital campaign, so suddenly bring in an extra $3 million over the next 2 years. Go. And I'm guessing that's not a successful model. Kimberly's going, no, I know it's not. So what do you mean?
How I knew to write that question? Just ask me how I knew to write that question.
So What would you recommend is a good balance between major gifts and grants when it comes to a typical capital campaign?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody, and it's kind of good to assess on an individual basis. Okay, what are we doing now, right? Like, what are we getting from grants? How much time are we investing in? What are we investing in major gifts? And if you can kind of, I think maintaining that like proportion is right, like the piece of the pie. But if the whole circle kind of grows in an even way, that's a nice sort of equilibrium to sort of pursue, right?
Yeah.
So it's not fair. Like the scenario you outlined, that would be really hard on someone to just suddenly make those things happen. And grants can be slower, right? I mean, it's not as perhaps as immediate as an individual giving, although those gifts can be slow too, especially if there are multi-year pledges or maybe a bequest.
Yeah.
But it's never a good idea, especially in the context of a capital campaign, to put too much weight on one sort of person's shoulders or sort of one bucket of revenue shoulder, right? And doing a lot of readiness work prior to the campaign and doing a feasibility study early on in the campaign, that's really going to suss out like, okay, where can we get the funds from each of those buckets or pieces of the pie or whatever, and then have a plan and go. So there's a lot you can do sort of internally very early on in a campaign to suss that out, rather than just it's kind of like your example, man, of just okay, we're gonna do a building and it's this much and we're going like no, you should really suss out what is the capacity, what's possible, what are the available grants, and then go after them rather than just kind of setting an arbitrary goal because somebody's going to get burned out. And burnout is a huge piece of the capital campaign story that doesn't get talked a lot about. And you want to avoid that.
Yeah. Well, I think anybody working in nonprofits in any capacity, but certainly in grant writing and fundraising, I think the turnover is high, burnout is high, and I can only imagine how that affects people tenfold when you've got a capital campaign on top of
Exactly.
all your other daily duties.
Yep, absolutely.
I wanted to hop in. There are a couple of terms that we've been tossing around, and just in case there are people who are brand new to that who are listening, could you define what a feasibility study is in one or two sentences?
You're right. I should have done that because it is a little bit inside baseball. And I hate the name. And I don't think I'm alone in that because it's not can we and should we do a campaign? Yes or no, right? You shouldn't get through a feasibility study and find out actually we can't do a campaign. Like there are some things you can do way before that to decide it. But a feasibility study is in one or two sentences, you are sort of socializing and testing the goal and the case for support with kind of a small group of select existing supporters. And there could be a few prospective supporters in there for sure, but you're kind of bringing in a close group of people early on in the process, getting buy-in and sort of gauging their capacity to give. And the outcome should be, we're going to test 5. Okay, we might come back and find out we can raise 5. Maybe we can only raise 3. Maybe we can raise 7. Maybe we were going to leave money on the table without doing it, right? And that does happen. Actually happens pretty often. But the point is, you get sort of a much better idea of how to raise the money and what the best sort of goal amount is, while sort of testing your case for support to see, which elements sort of resonate with which audiences and at what degree they resonate. So it's a really good confidence builder, especially for the board and leadership to say, we've got a game plan, we can raise this amount, and then critically, this is the roadmap to doing so, rather than again just kind of pulling a random number out of the hat and saying, well, we got to do this project, so we got to raise this money, which is there's something to be said for having enthusiasm and confidence. But I've seen a lot of organizations skip it and maybe get stuck with a $10 million construction bill that they can't really cover, right? And maybe they have to do some creative financing to bridge the gap, and that's just not a fun situation to be in if that wasn't your original intent.
So thank you for that. And the second term or concept, I don't think we've we've talked around it a little bit, but it's the idea that a lot of capital campaigns, if you're listening and you've sat in on board meetings about this, there's always a specific shape that turns up on a slide when you're talking about a capital campaign. It's usually a pyramid shape.
Pyramid.
And if you could define that for folks, because I was thinking back, I feel like we talked about capital campaigns in like season 2.
Oh, wow.
I'm thinking it was pre-pandemic, and I don't know that we've talked about it since. So yeah, if we could just, if you don't mind, we could just pop in with that.
The donor pyramid, it's kind of a good visual to illustrate where the money comes from, right? If you have, for example, a $10 million campaign goal, it's common, although there are some exceptions, but it's very common that you might have a lead gift of like $2 million, 20% of the goal. And that's the top of the pyramid. And then the next level out is maybe you get a couple $1 million goals. And then maybe you're getting 500K goals, and it kind of goes out and down. And suddenly you can see like, hey, to get to, 80% of our goal, it's probably going to come from about 20% of the gifts, the actual donations made. And that's one thing that our research sort of confirmed, because that's sort of been the prevailing wisdom. Like the Pareto principle is another way I've sort of heard, where 80% of whatever comes from 20% of the audience. And that is pretty typical. There were a lot of campaigns in our analysis that were maybe a little flatter. There were some that were sombrero shaped, where it was just a couple really big gifts. Yeah, the donor sombrero. That's a thing, because mid-level giving is
sombrero.
Is pretty hard. Nice. So it's a lot of, and it kind of tracks with wealth concentration, right? Where it's a lot of big donors with a majority of the support, and then you go public and you're getting a lot of like $50 or $100 gifts to kind of finish up. But that's generally the shape that most campaigns kind of take. And there are, of course, exceptions. And if you are an exception, you didn't do anything wrong necessarily. That's just sort of what your community looks like, which is fine. And that, one cool thing about our research is there aren't really a lot of wrong answers. There are some common pitfalls for sure, but the sector is diverse, but in, by and large, most campaigns are kind of pyramid shaped.
So we've talked a lot about the different needs for different kind of roles changing in organizations as capital campaigns come into play. And Amanda, once again, the brilliance of, hey, we'll get a consulting firm to do our general daily bread kind of grants while we focus on that. That's amazing. Yeah. But I'm also curious about smaller nonprofits, because a lot of the examples we've used are kind of connoting, well, you've got a staff, you've got enough money to go out and hire, you've got enough cash flow so that you can go and hire a consulting firm to come in and do your daily grant lift while you focus on that. But what does the data suggest in this study about smaller nonprofits who might be like, we don't have any of that. How are we going to ever raise this money? What are some things? Because I know smaller agencies participated.
Absolutely. And one of the first questions we asked everybody is, what's sort of your annual revenue? So we arbitrarily define small nonprofits in our analysis as organizations that in a regular annual year are raising less than $1 million philanthropically. Okay. So totally arbitrary cutoff, right? And I've heard $10 million organizations call themselves small, by comparison. So there's always a comparison. Okay. But I separated those under 1 million folks out. And looked at how they answered compared to kind of their larger companions in the data. And there were a couple of standout things. One is success rates were just as high in that 95th percentile, which was great. Those organizations, it was also more likely that it was their first campaign, which doesn't really surprise me, because if you are kind of just starting out, capital campaigns are a growth catalyst, and you got to start somewhere. So that wasn't too big of a surprise. But the dollars raised and the goal sizes were really the biggest difference. It was just kind of like how many zeros and commas were at the end of their goal, right? I think the average, dollars raised by that group of organizations was, $3 or $4 million, which is great, which I know is going to be transformative for those organizations compared to like 8 or 9 million for the rest of the folks. So
Okay.
it's just kind of like, how many numbers. But here's the thing that I really love to see. One question I asked was, what were the benefits to doing the campaign besides dollars raised? So I asked everybody that. And I gave people kind of a menu of options like, the board got more effective or we got more confident asking for bigger gifts. There was a ton of possible responses. The small organizations had higher rates of those benefits than everybody else. And I thought that was so fascinating and cool, frankly, because if you pair that with the fact that it was their first campaign, that signals to me that like doing that campaign kind of leveled up the organization. It kind of took them from, one level to the next in terms of sophistication, confidence, internal systems. Many organizations invested in, a staff member, prospect research software. There were a lot of cool ways that manifested. And I thought that was so fun to see because you're right. I think smaller nonprofits are probably more nervous about going into a campaign, especially if it's their first campaign. But coming out the other end, they were no less likely to be successful, and also outperformed bigger organizations, which is something you don't hear very often about small shops, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting is there wasn't a huge difference in staff size by the small organizations and sort of organizations that are maybe raising $3 million or $5 million a year. The typical sort of modality has been a very engaged ED and a dedicated, development director, head of fundraising. And that's sort of the tag team. And that's the typical tag team at a $5 million organization, a $1 million organization, a $10 million organization, which I think speaks to maybe the need for us as a sector to invest more staff, right, as an organization grows. But that's, another conversation. But my takeaway is small shops are just as likely. And I also think that they probably hold closer relationships just by nature of their size, and maybe lean on those people even more. So anyone can do a capital campaign if you've got a base of supporters already that you can draw from. I think there can be big organizations that have no individual giving program. That to me is the differentiator, not size, but are you already sort of fundraising? That's kind of what I look for. Like if I see a small organization, necessarily assume that they can't do it. But I've talked to a lot of big organizations that they need a couple, 2 or 3 years to establish a giving program before they can really embark on a campaign. So it's not necessarily size. It's that existing base of support that's kind of the green light to get started.
That is, it's really good news, but then when you were start for smaller shops, but I have worked with larger agencies where they're like, well, we just want to bring in grants. We don't need to do any work with donors or major donors or individual donors. And Amanda and I worked with an organization in the Atlanta area. Amanda's still working with them, where they were like, we don't really need to do that. We just need grants. And I'm like, I could not disagree more, my friends.
Totally. Yeah. I just talked to an organization like that yesterday, and it totally grant supported and fee for service supported. And they're going to have a hard time with a campaign like this. I'm sure somebody's done it somewhere in some time, but it's about the diversified revenue streams, I think, is the name of the game, right?
And I also want to make it clear, I'm not talking about, there are lots of grassroots organizations in particularly lower income areas where they really,
that's different.
And where if they're place based and it is in a lower income area, there generally may be a hard road ahead to build individual donors. I'm talking about organizations that have been in existence for a while and are like, no, it's all grants, because I think everybody's afraid to ask for money, and they think that the grant writer, because you were putting it, in a portal online, that it's somehow less threatening. That's another conversation for another time. But
well, this has been a great conversation, but I wanted to end with asking what's the best way for people to find out more about the study and your work with the Capital Campaign Pro.
Yeah, it's just if you go to capitalcampaignpro.com/research, there's sort of a mega page of all of the resources, the full report. There's an executive summary. There's some videos and podcasts, where you can get me giving more commentary. But yeah, it's totally free. Like a salesperson won't call you or email you if you download it. And like we said before, I think there's maybe only like 10 or 15% of respondents are like in our sort of, model or cohort. So it really is meant to be a nice picture of the whole sector in general. And if you download it, you will get invited to take the next survey. You don't have to, but if maybe you're listening to this or you read the report and say, gosh, this was not my experience at all. Like I want to hear that story because I want it to be even more, indicative of the sector. So, would love for you to lend your voice. We usually put out the survey like October, November-ish, and then release in like January, February. That's kind of the cycle. So depending on when you're listening to this, would love for you to take the survey if it does indeed come across your desk.
Nice. We'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for everybody to find.
Nice.
So, well, thanks for joining us today, Stephen. This was great.
Yeah, anytime.
Thanks again to today's sponsor, Grant Guru. If you want to learn more about this incredible new tool to the grant prospect research market, visit grantguru.com/US. You'll find the link in our show notes.
And remember, they are providing a 20% off discount code on your subscription. So when you go to make your purchase, enter the code HayDay 963. That's HayDay 963.
So whether you're deep in the middle of a capital campaign or you're thinking about launching one, or you're not sure how to spell capital campaign, or you're the grant writer that's got handed the whole thing, I feel like our conversation with Stephen had something for everyone. And I always learn something with each podcast episode. And also the benchmark study, for those of you who, like me, delight in data, is right there. You can get it at capitalcampaignpro.com/research. And Stephen said no salesperson will call. So there you go.
Yep. Well, speaking of things that keep development professionals up at night, please join us for our next episode where we are breaking down the differences between single audits and annual audits. Mm-hmm. You ever stared at a grant requirement wondering which audit they're asking for and why? Because it matters. Then this episode is for you. And we promise we're going to make it as painless as possible.
We will do our level best. And it's an important thing, and we're going to break it down for you. But like every single time we've done this since 2017, when we first started recording, I'm just deeply grateful and honored. I think we both are, that you've chosen to listen to this podcast, whether it's the first time or the 150th time. Thank you. And please join us in the weeks to come, where we're just going to keep doing it and bringing it to you.
See you soon.